Welcome, everyone, to Osher at Dartmouth's first special event of the year. My name is Pam Allen, and I am an Osher member and special events coordinator. Throughout the year, we hope to offer a variety of both virtual and live events, such as literary readings, book discussions, art openings, and other one-time adventures. This afternoon, we're proud to present James Gustave Speth and his recently published book, They Knew, the U.S. federal government's 50-year role in causing the climate crisis. I'd like to give a special thanks to Osher's marketing and communications coordinator, Sarah Chamberlain, and assistant program manager, Laura Belbeck, for their efforts in making this event a reality. And as always, I'd like to thank program director, Lisa King. Osher member Rob Taylor will introduce Gus and facilitate conversation, questions, and answers. Rob Taylor is an Osher study leader and retired journalist and has often written on environmental issues. He directed training programs for journalists from developing countries, including a seminar in Denmark before the 2009 Copenhagen International Conference on Climate Change. Please enjoy our program.
Good afternoon. I apologize for bringing everybody inside on a beautiful day. I can see the sun out there and it's just gorgeous. I'm honored to introduce Gus Speth, a superstar of environmental law and policy. His resume sparkles with enough spectacular achievements for 4 or 5 careers. So I'll just give you some highlights. Gus was chairman of the U.S. Council on Environmental Quality under President Jimmy Carter. He went on to serve as administrator of the United Nations Development Program, chair of the UN Development Group, dean for a decade of the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, the nation's top environmental studies school, and more recently, professor at Vermont Law School. But the highlights don't capture how extraordinary Gus's career has been. To use a baseball analogy, this guy hit a home run almost every time he stepped up to the plate. He graduated from Yale summa cum laude and was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. He got his law degree from Yale and clerked for Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black. Enough training, it was time to get to work. Gus co-founded the Natural Resources Defense Council, still the nation's leading environmental advocacy law firm. He served NRDC as a senior attorney until he joined the Carter administration at CEQ. After Carter lost the 1980 election, Gus founded and served as president of the World Resources Institute, a top center for environmental data, research, and analysis. He's been showered with honorary degrees and awards. Gus is a neighbor of ours. From a home in Stratford, Vermont, he continues to write and worry about the earth his 6 grandchildren will inherit. He is the author, co-author, or editor of 11 books. He's here to discuss his latest book, They Knew, which traces the U.S. government's 50-year record of recognizing the threat of climate change and failing to effectively mitigate it. This tragic tale continues today as President Biden and a divided Congress struggle once again to make meaningful cuts in greenhouse gas emissions. Gus is going to start speaking in a moment. I just wanted to encourage the audience to send questions that we can pose to Gus. You can send them using the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Gus, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And Rob, thank you for that introduction. Made me seem a lot better than I am. And I really appreciate that. Uh, I have known Rob by reputation and in person for a long time. He was a distinguished reporter, and I was aware of his work way back then. And it's an honor to be sharing this podium with him. And thank you, Pam and Lisa and others at Osher. What a wonderful operation you have. And I'm privileged to be a part of it this afternoon. Um, so let me talk for maybe 30 minutes, and then we'll have a lot of time to have some questions and answers, hopefully answers. We'll see. The First, a word about the book and its background. I think it's a useful book. It tells a very sad story, but some sad stories need to be told. And I think this is one of them. If you think about the big things that have happened in the last 50 years and reflect on where we are now, it does seem to me a clear conclusion that one of the big things that happened in that period was that our federal government failed to rise to the challenge of the climate crisis as it began to emerge and now as it is beginning to fully flower. And so it's the story of how that happened. And I think history is important. And it's important to understand where we go next and to take some lessons from it. And I hope the book provides the basis for doing that. It grew out of a lawsuit that was brought by a group called Our Children's Trust as attorneys for 21 youth plaintiffs who sued the federal government for climate inaction almost 6 years ago now. And the book was originally most of it. I've edited it and updated it, but the original base of the book, the core of the book, was a report that I did for them in the context of that lawsuit. And one of the things that I was challenged to try to explore and write about was whether the federal government had participated in an important, meaningful way in endangering the future of the young plaintiffs in the case, the 21 kids at that time. So it begins with Carter, really, because they wanted me to do the Carter administration because I was in the Carter administration. And then they liked what I did, so they said, do the other administrations. And I did. But it was hard work. But thank goodness this group, Our Children's Trust, had done a tremendous amount of documentary research over a period of many years, and I had access to all that. And with that, I was able to put together this history. And all of the documents and in the book are online now at Our Children's Trust. So if you want to go from the book to look up something, you can do that now online. So it's all there. So the book, I think, reveals several patterns, several important things that I looked particularly at. And one is that the knowledge of climate science and the climate threat was presented vigorously in almost all cases within the frame of each administration that we've had, certainly from Carter up through Trump, which is the main body of the book, looks at those administrations. And it just makes it very clear that the science that was presented as early really as LBJ, and then a lot more in the Carter years, that science has held up very, very well. This has not been a case of flip-flops or misguided misdirection or predictions that didn't come true. The science has been validated over and over and over again and repeated over and over again in each administration. So if there really is a hoax out there, it's climate denial, not the climate issue and its science. So the book looks at that in each of the different administrations. It also looks at the alternatives to our dependence on fossil fuels in each administration. To what degree was the administration and the Congress in power at that time, were they aware of, were they knowledgeable about, was it presented in terms of alternatives to our fossil reliance? And the book shows that in every administration, there was proposals put forward to move off of the fossil economy and onto renewable and energy efficiency future. And that started with Carter, and I was there. And you will remember the famous solar reflectors, collectors on the White House roof. And Carter did so much more. I mean, he set a goal of 20% renewable energy by the year 2000, a 20-year goal, and he did a great deal to promote renewable energy and energy efficiency. I'm not saying his administration was perfect, but it was a clear sense on his part that this was the direction we had to go. And if we had gone that way, we could have had 40 years of a smooth transition out of fossil fuels. But of course, he was followed by Reagan, and that got everything he did in this area was pretty much rejected by the incoming administration, a pattern I want to come back to. I think the third thing I want to stress that the book goes into detail about in every administration and every Congress is the persistent support for fossil fuels. I said Carter wasn't perfect, and every administration has pulled out the stops to promote fossil fuel use. When we started with Carter, we were 90% fossil fuels. We're about 80% fossil fuels today. Meanwhile, our energy use, of course, has grown up in that period, and so has our carbon dioxide emission over that time. So really, every administration did everything it could to sustain, protect, and promote fossil fuel development. And the book goes into that in every administration. We might come back to what President Biden has done in the Q&A. It's not in the book, but I'm happy to talk about it. And it is different. There's something very different about what Biden is doing than any previous administration. So the book documents these conclusions, and I hope, I think convincingly. There are some other conclusions and lessons that I think the book brings forward. One is that there's been a cyclical pattern in a way. We've had three administrations, Carter, Clinton, and Obama, that all in varying ways took the climate issue seriously and endeavored to do something to move things forward on the climate front and on the energy front. And every one of them was followed by what I think of as a flamethrower administration that has, with some success, undermined what the previous administration did. And, those of you who know our history a little bit know which administrations followed Carter and Clinton and Obama. And I won't go into that, but you may see a partisan pattern there, and it's clearly there. I say that without trying to elevate the Democrats too high, because as I've said earlier, they all did everything they could to sustain and promote fossil fuels. And right up through and including Obama, who when he left office was quite proud of the work that they had done on fracking and export of fossil fuels and other things. So the lesson there, the question there is, are we going to see this pattern repeated again? And is there anything that we can do about it to prevent it from happening again? A second lesson that I draw from this history is that our federal government in general and our political parties in particular are unworthy, untrustworthy partners in this enterprise of addressing the climate issue. And of course, we see that right on up to this very day with Senator Manchin and what he's done to Biden's proposals. But we have to remember that before Manchin from West Virginia, there was Bobby Byrd from West Virginia, who had his own pet power plant outside of the Capitol, big thing, sitting there burning fossil fuels, probably West Virginia coal. And so I just underscore how unreliable these institutions that we have today are in terms of dealing with climate. I think the book also underscores that good science is not enough. We've had a ton of good science, a lot more good science in this area than we ever had on ozone depletion, for example, and yet we did something successful in that area. So good science is not enough, and comfortable advocacy is not enough. That's been my life, I guess, in a way, kind of armchair advocacy, a few marches now and then, one jail sentence, but otherwise very comfortable. And that and everybody else's comfortable advocacy hasn't really moved the needle very much. So I conclude from this that something different is needed now, right? You can't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And then I think finally, the one final lesson I draw from the book is that when you have a pattern like this that persists decade after decade, in the face of good science and comfortable advocacy and a deep concern, and very little happens, you have to conclude, I think, that there's something wrong with the system. The system that we live and work in is really geared to priorities other than sustaining climate, sustaining environment, and indeed, I would say, sustaining people and communities. So we ought to think hard about how we change the system. I'm always glad to see in these climate marches a banner come out that says system change, not climate change. I asked myself what accounts for this failure, this system failure, this persistence of the fossil commitment. Well, I think the climate issue is complicated. It's hard to understand. There's no doubt about that. And for most of the time, it's been very remote from most people's lives. Secondly, we really are dependent on fossil fuels. I mean, as those CEOs from the big oil companies yesterday stressed, you need us. And right this minute, you really do. And you can see, even in the face of the protestations about inaction on climate and all, you can see the sort of pushback occurring across a number of fronts, and notably, well, is very visibly in yesterday's hearings. Thirdly, but being dependent today doesn't mean dependent tomorrow. And this was a sleight of hand that occurred several times in the hearings yesterday. Then I think we have to, the third factor is, of course, the tremendous political clout and money of the fossil fuel industry and how it's been deployed through disinformation campaigns, campaign support, fake infomercials, and other things over a period of decades, a good bit of which was really brilliantly recorded by Naomi Oreskes in her book, The Merchants of Doubt. And then the fourth factor has been this, once you admit that you've got a climate problem on your hands, you're going to have to do something about it. And that something involves a lot of government action. And so the whole climate issue has run up, and many other issues really, has run up against this anti-government, anti-regulation ideology that is so prevalent today. We're reminded of two comments, one by Grover Norquist, who was the organizer of the right-wing opposition to government action for many years. And he said, our goal is to shrink government down so that it's so small we can drown it in a bathtub. And of course, Reagan said that government's not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem. And that those sentences, that's phrasing out of the 80s has gone forward to today and is now a full-blown political movement, I would say. So let's turn to hope and try to avoid what I sometimes call hopium, real hope. Well, there's some different things now that are happening. There is now climate devastation, and it's being recognized as such. For many decades, it was not. Even in the midst of very serious storms and droughts and other things, the media wouldn't call it a spade. But now it is recognized, and we know we have a climate crisis on our hands. Anybody, honestly, with a brain can see that, whether they admit it or not. Secondly, there's been a dramatic rise in the political salience of the climate issue. It's now moved from a policy question to a political question. And of course, we live that now for many weeks, watching the Biden administration struggle. The third thing that's happened has been this flourishing of the youth movement, which I give a lot of credit to our Children's Trust and their early effort to represent these 21 youth plaintiffs starting 6 years ago. It really, I think, opened the eyes to a lot of young people that they could get involved in this issue, and was a forerunner of the much bigger and more powerful youth movement that's out there today. And that's great. Our friend Bill McKibben is starting a movement for old people. I've signed up, and you might check that out if you're over 60, I think his idea is. And as I mentioned, it's moved from a policy question to a political question. And when I think about, what needs to be done, I think I mentioned earlier that I think we need to do something different, right? More of the same. So what is different? What would be different? Well, I think a massive civic mobilization on a scale that's unprecedented, if we could do it, could make a difference. It could make a big difference. We need the kind of activism that we're seeing from Extinction Rebellion, from the Sunrise Movement, from some of the youth groups. I think there's still a hunger strike going on in front of the White House from Sunrise people. Anyhow, this is an area where we need to declare an end to comfortable advocacy and move into a realm where we are taking ourselves and our bodies and our monies and other things and doing things we haven't been doing in the past. And that includes elections. The environmental community has been on the sidelines of the political process, put there in part by the 501c3 requirements, but not entirely. And it's time to break out of that mold. We're not going to achieve things with traditional 501c3 advocacy, some things for sure, well, a lot for sure, but the big difference that we could make now is in elections. And so I think, and then I think it's very important, and in a way that's what the Juliana lawsuit stands for with the 21 youth plaintiffs. We need to move this issue into the judicial sphere. We've had a failure on the part of the executive branch and a failure on the part of the legislative branch. Well, we need to try to get some action out of the judicial branch. And it's happening in Europe more than it's happened here. But our Juliana lawsuit is still alive. There are other lawsuits. There's a lot of judicial activism occurring now. One of the great things about the Juliana case, I think, is that it's raising a constitutional issue. It is asserting that the constitutional rights under the Due Process Clause of the young people today have been violated by the federal government, and creates a requirement, a duty on the part of the federal government to act. And one good thing about a constitutional issue, if it can be erected and sustained, is that it transcends any particular administration. And it can go on into subsequent administrations. Now, I'm not naive about our Supreme Court, but I do think that we need to start insisting that the courts deal effectively with these issues, much as it dealt effectively earlier with large portions, at least, of the civil rights movement. And I said as earlier, I think it's also important that we add to our array of things that we are concerned with a new concern about how to change the system. I could go into detail about how our system right now is geared for perpetuating the current climate disaster, and offer some ideas, but I've written, unfortunately, way too much about all the changes that we could make to change the system, to move to a new system of political economy. So my hopes for the book are that it will inform people, especially young people who didn't live through all of this, that people will understand a lot better how we got here, and will therefore be motivated more powerfully into a new era of uncomfortable advocacy. And I think so I hope it will motivate people. I hope it will spur people to act. I hope it will convince people that reliance on some of our major established institutions, like our political parties, is not going to be enough. And I hope the book will support a new wave of judicial activism, and I wish the attorneys well in their Juliana litigation and out in the district court in Oregon. And I hope that it will bring more and more people to focus on changing the system, because right now it'll give us some good answers, but we've got to walk on two legs and pair our efforts at reform and traditional action with a new phase of looking more deeply at changing the political economy that we have today. So thank you, Rob. That's the end of me until you start asking me questions.
Okay, Gus. I want to apologize to my audience. I told you to use the chat feature, and actually it's better if you use the Q&A feature to send in your questions. We've gotten several already, but I'm sure Gus's comments will have set off some synapses in your brain so that you have some ideas that you'd like to explore further with him. So click on the Q&A tab to get a question to him. A couple of people have asked about the Juliana litigation that was the basis for this original draft that you've expanded into this book. I've seen some indications that people are trying to reopen that case after it was dismissed by the Ninth Circuit. What's the status of that litigation now?
Good question. Let me preface it by saying that I'm not an attorney on the case, and there's a lot that I haven't been participating in terms of litigation strategy and legal argument. But the deal is, right now, the plaintiffs have asked for the to amend the complaint to take care of some of the problems that they encountered on appeal, including all the way up to the Supreme Court before, and to seek a judgment from the court on the constitutional issue, and I think so it's a narrowing in a way of the plaintiff's request, and it's now pending before the district court in Oregon, where whatever the court does, I'm sure that it will be appealed to the Ninth Circuit again, where it's been several times. So the case is still alive. I think the plaintiffs are very hopeful that this time they will finally open the door and have these issues go before the court, and get and what one thing they really want is a trial to bring out all this information, not just from me, but from health experts and many others.
Gus, Keith Chrisman has asked, you talk about the administrations and their knowledge, but he asks, how much did the presidents actually see come across their desks? Was climate change and its effects kept from the presidents in any way?
Well, that's very, very interesting. And I think I know some of the answer to that, but of course, for example, I don't really know what President Reagan might have really focused on, but certainly the three Democratic presidents that I mentioned were, of course, well aware and conversant with the issue, going as far back as Carter. George Herbert Walker Bush certainly was aware of the issue, was briefed on it probably many times by his administrator of EPA, Bill Riley. And, in terms of being protected, I would say in a way he was protected from the issue by his chief of staff. Are you ready for this? John Sununu. And Sununu surfaces elsewhere in this story as someone who really sat down hard on climate progress in the George Herbert Walker Bush years. I think so. It's a different story with each administration, but certainly top aides to the presidents in all administrations were well aware of the issue and was well aware. I mean, during this whole time, the climate program over at the Department of Energy was turning out studies. For a long period of time, we had the Office of Technology Assessment, an arm of the Congress, turning out studies on the climate issue. The National Academy of Sciences was sending in reports after report after report on the issue. You'd have to, and I can just tell you from the Carter years, as I quote in the book, the cite in the book, we were well covered in the New York Times. It wasn't, we had, we were, many times what we were saying about the climate issue got well reported in the New York Times. Some of you may remember the environment reporter from that era was a man named Phil Shabakoff. And Phil wrote a lot of stories, and there were editorials about. So throughout this whole period, it's been almost a willing denial of reality to kind of put the climate issue out of the way. I mentioned what I thought the problems were in terms of making it a front and center political issue, but one thing I quote in the book is a memo from Moynihan to Ehrlichman in the Nixon administration, talking about how areas in D.C. could soon flood or would one day flood if the issue wasn't addressed. And so now it's entirely the maps of what's going to happen quite possibly show that. So anyhow, it hadn't been something that was in the back room or just with the science advisors. We moved it, for example, into the policy process and created quite a in the Carter years, created quite an argument between the environmental folks and the new Department of Energy under James Schlesinger, and so it's been an issue. I mean, Bill Riley tried hard, I think, in his term as administrator, uh, and and I know that Clinton and Gore, they certainly knew a lot about the issue and tried to do something about it, but were stymied, particularly by the what's now called the Byrd-Hagel. Well, I guess it was called that then, the Byrd-Hagel resolution. But here was our Democratic senator from West Virginia blocking action on the Kyoto Protocol.
Yeah, Gus, one of the things that I found surprising about your analysis was that I always thought Democrats took climate change seriously and Republicans recently have not. Yet your chart showed fossil fuel production and use rose under Democratic presidents almost as consistently as Republicans. Why?
Well, I would say it was as consistently. The best you can say about the Democratic administrations is that their energy policies were all of the above. But in no case, until we get to Biden, do we have a president who has basically, has said we have to get to zero emissions by a date certain. In other words, we have to, in effect, phase out fossil fuels by the mid-century in Biden's goals. And that's new. It's very important. It's potentially far-reaching. But to get there, we're going to have to build on the modest efforts that we're now launching, I hope, as a result of the Biden spending proposals. We have a long way to go. Those proposals are going to, among other things, among other really good things, are going to stimulate the economy. And that's normally thought of as a good thing, but it is just GDP, and that has a lot of bad things in it that's going to go up. But if you spend these trillions, it's going to stimulate the economy, and that economy right now is, fueled 80% on fossil fuels. So there's in the spending plans, there's a built-in counterforce to emissions reduction, and that is just the aggregate expansion of the economy and all the things you're going to spend on. A lot of cement, for example, and I think therefore it follows that we have to pair these spending initiatives, the budget initiatives, with a tremendously powerful regulatory array aimed at systematically and reducing emissions in all sectors and all types of greenhouse gases. We need a powerful regulatory framework to pair and to move in parallel with the spending initiatives.
Okay, Gus. Bill Secord has a good question about what kinds of things you think need to be done. Bill asks, is there any movement at the government level regarding climate change possible without significant campaign finance reform?
Well, I definitely think campaign finance reform would help immensely. We've had efforts at public financing, and we need that. It'd be great to have a constitutional amendment on speech and corporate power in our political process. But right now, I think there is a lot we can do without major campaign finance reform, as important as that could be, and as much as I do support it. Money does have a diminishing return, as all the advertisers know, and if we're sufficiently mobilized and we're getting out the votes, as we did recently, a year ago, then we can win some elections. But it's complicated. But we have to make environment and climate a highly salient issue in the races, and that means getting organized at the congressional district level and at the Senate level, and really pulling out the stops electorally. And I think if we do, there's a real possibility of headway. But you know as well as I do what the overall political situation is, and the president saying yesterday or the day before that his future does depend on getting this package reconciliation through, and so I think there are just a lot of ifs out there, but certainly we can do well if we really work at it and put our own money out there and write our own postcards to a district far away if we need to.
Robert Graybill asks, can Gus or a panelist describe the role that communities of faith can and should take in addressing the climate emergency? Any ideas, Gus?
I think this is very important, critical, because there's no set of institutions that can reach, more people effectively from a credible speaker, so to speak, a credible source than the faith communities. And so, when I see some denominations really organized to confront this problem and to talk about it a lot to their congregations, I'm really very gratified and excited about it. I think there's some really great networking going on within the faith communities, and I think at the very top, we have the leaders like the Pope and others calling attention to this issue. We recently saw a study which showed that the Catholic bishops in the U.S. weren't paying that much attention to what their Pope was saying, and that I hope will change. But there has been leadership in the faith communities. It's also important for another reason, because we do need to have the evangelicals on board on this issue. And there have been major inroads in evangelical thinking about the seriousness of this issue, and particularly among the young. And that's all to the good. So I encourage everyone to be sure that their faith institutions are stepping up to the plate, that locally and regionally and even internationally now.
Gus, the Biden administration is calling for cutting greenhouse gas emissions this decade by 50% below a 2005 baseline. Is that enough?
Well, enough. We think about thresholds and other things, but this problem is already beyond where it ought to be, and it's going to get worse. And So I don't think we should be naive about the seriousness of the wound that we have inflicted on future generations and the environment. It's going to be very serious. Uh, Goals like Biden has put in place, I think, are admirable. And getting to zero net emissions by 2050 across all the greenhouse gases, that's admirable. For the first time, we're talking about really transforming the energy sector, and that's what we need to do, among other things. And and so, I can't argue with Biden's goals right now. I sure would like to see them be on a track to effectively implement them. Whether they need to be tightened up down the road, probably. But right now, we've got a worthy target to try to work with him to implement.
Gus, we got a question sent in even before this program started. Meredith Angwin of Wilder, Vermont asks, why not invest in carbon-free nuclear power, which she says the NRDC has opposed, and the NRDC tried to shut down Vermont Yankee? What can you say about nuclear power?
Well, I wouldn't be in favor right now of closing down existing operating nuclear power plants, insofar as we rigorously determine that they're safe. Not that we know what to do with the waste, because we don't. But this is not a good juncture, I think, to start closing down existing nuclear that is safe and it's already constructed. Beyond that, I'm deeply skeptical of nuclear. It can be hideously expensive. The Westinghouse and the utilities, for example, in my home state of South Carolina, tried to launch two new nuclear power plants in the context of this current phase, not the old ones 50 years ago or whatever, but and the whole the whole thing amounted to billions of dollars of debt. Is in that context that I think Westinghouse went bankrupt, and so it's just and there are all these unresolved issues about safety, and then there's even talk now about reviving the plutonium recycle and breeder reactors and things of this type, which are even more dangerous than the current generation of reactors. So I don't think this is a financially or environmentally is a road that we want to go down. In part, and maybe in large part, because there are alternatives. I mean, the price of wind and solar is way down, and it's it's more competitive now than nuclear or coal even, which is pretty cheap. So I think we have our work cut out for us in developing solar and wind, and combining it with vast increases in energy efficiency, and shifting to electric vehicles. And this is we know, I think most people who are worried about this problem know what have come to basically the same conclusions about what we need to do. And it really goes back in a way to the path that Carter outlined in 1980 earlier, which I talk about in the book, as well as the things he did that were not so admirable in terms of climate.
Yeah, Gus, as you've written in your book, Carter, while he talked a good game about renewables, he was promoting syn fuels and more coal use and actually retiring natural gas and replacing natural gas and oil with coal generated power. What makes you confident that Carter would have been different in the second term if he got one?
Well, let's be clear. Carter uh, was absolutely committed to renewables as the future energy for the future energy of the country, and did a tremendous amount to promote energy efficiencies. And you know, the book describes all this. And On the other hand, he inherited a huge problem of oil imports, as we know, had skyrocketed in the previous short period, really, and it was part of his mandate, as he saw it, to curtail our oil imports and our dependence on OPEC and other oil sources from abroad, and so the solution was to shift to coal, and there was a lot of that going on in his administration, and then that was compounded by uh, something that he promoted in his famous Malaise speech and in the midterm, which was this massive synfuels program combined with an energy mobilization board. And this, you know, really drove us in the administration who were on the environmental side up the wall. And I talk about this in the book, and I talk about the reports that were, you know, flying about in the administration, basically urging that this not be that he not move forward with this, but he did. And in the end, neither the Energy Mobilization Board or the Synfuels program of that era amounted to much. But nowadays, we have fracking and we have tar sands and other unusual sources of fossil fuels that are being widely promoted. And But so I think Carter was again all of the above. I don't think you can argue against his sincerity. And why do I think he was going to do something in the administration? Well, I talked to him about the problem a couple of times, and I think he was very sincere. And if you look at the things he said, is he knew it. I mean, he knew the science. And indeed, in the early months of his administration, his science advisor, Frank Press, wrote a very powerful memo to the White House saying, you know, this is an issue we have to attend to. They said it's not yet a matter of, you know, dire emergency or urgency, but it's something that needs to begin to be factored in. And As I mentioned earlier, he you know, in some famous Sun Day, SUN day, 2 words speech, um, he he you know, proposed a goal of 20% renewable energy by the year 2000. So he was sincere about it, and I think he understood it. And you know, he was a good scientist, and that, you know, he would have been under tremendous pressure. Can you imagine? I mean, but I think he was tough.
Gus, Skip Sturman asks, in your opinion, what made the effort to combat ozone depletion successful, and what lessons can we learn from that effort?
Well, I think there are some important lessons. It was successful, but it'd be hard to imagine a sharper contrast between the ozone issue and the climate. I mean, the, you know, carbon dioxide fossil fuel issue. Um, you know, I could be a little facetious and say, well, you know, it helps if you want to do something to have a problem if it's going to cause skin cancer in white people. Um, and um, and that's what, that in a way that was a big motivating factor to do something about ozone depletion. Um, I think the biggest factor in the end, well, at first, of course, the ozone issue was simple compared with the climate issue, and it dealt with a very small set of chemicals that were used in fairly isolated contexts, whereas the energy issue is complicated, it's hard to understand, it's long term, it's all over the place, it affects all sectors. So there are very, very sharp differences between the two. But a critical thing, and you talk about a lesson to learn from it, is that in the ozone case, the industry opposition to action more or less vanished. And why did it vanish? Well, it vanished because DuPont created an alternative to the chlorofluorocarbons that it could sell. So if they got rid of the chlorofluorocarbons, it was going to create a new market for DuPont and others. And I think it was not nearly the kind of hard fought issue in the end. A lot of the industries threw in the towel, and it's been a very successful international agreement on moving forward since then. And I think it just so happens that one of the alternative chemicals, HFCs, turns out to be a serious greenhouse gas. And one of the things that the international community is now trying to do is to not only move away from CFCs, but to move away from HFCs for the climate reason. And that's been another success story in international action.
Gus, Reed Drucker's got a question about the international aspect of the climate change problem, and he's saying what suggestion is clearly a global problem. What suggestions do you have to address international coordination? Who takes leadership and pushes for a solution?
Well, I'm an old UN person, I'm afraid. The people don't really appreciate that these conferences of the parties, which we are now having, starting in a few days in Glasgow on climate, are UN sponsored treaty regimes. And I think, there are many problems with getting full international cooperation. But certainly that cooperation is not going to be very meaningful unless a handful of major players agree. And these big conferences where, I don't know, tens of thousands of people are now descending on Scotland. They serve a lot of useful purposes, and the UN framework serves a lot of useful purposes. But we need something in a sort of a sidebar initiative on the part of a half a dozen major players, and putting the European Union in is one of those. And but China, good gosh, I mean, China is now by far the biggest emitter, and has plans that are not adequate to dealing with this issue. Of course, ours aren't either, but theirs are even worse in terms of plans. And we've had this situation where the governments are going into the Glasgow summit, with proposals which only, at best, half of what we need, even if they were fully implemented. And so we're in bad shape. And I hate to be, I don't want to be overly pessimistic about this, but it does appear that things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. The question is, do we have it in us to to head off the worst, and I think we do. But it's going to take the kind of actions that I think take the kind of actions I enumerated in my opening, as well as joining forces. In civil society internationally, there's been too little of that, where we organize civil society internationally to impact the process and not just nationally. So much as we're calling upon countries to get together, we need to see the NGOs get together, and we need to see international movements, which some of it we can see in the evolution of Extinction Rebellion into other places, and 350.org, our own Vermont-based group, has done a good job of developing an international presence as an NGO. So we need a lot more of that.
Gus, we're running out of time. I'm going to turn this back over to Pam so that she can close this session, but this has been very entertaining and interesting. I'm apologetic to those whose good questions couldn't get to the point of being asked, but this has been a great session. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Rob. It's been a pleasure to be with you again. And Pam and others, thank you for this opportunity. And for those of you who listened in, it's time to go enjoy the day, I suspect.
Gus, I want to thank you for your time and your energy and your presentation. And you were so gracious when I first emailed you. You were right up. Yes, I want to present for Osher. And your book, They Knew, we hope that you go to your local bookstores and purchase the book. And thank you, participants, for coming to our first virtual event. There were 110 of you who participated in this presentation. And a special thank to Rob Taylor for agreeing to play host and holding a conversation with Gus. I enjoyed doing this, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.